Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Laura Desmond. I am curator at the Monhegan Museum and a member of the Monhegan Associates Ecology Committee. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 5th annual Edward L. Deasy Endowed Lecture, which is the first event in this year's Art and Ecology event series, a collaboration between the Monhegan Museum of Art and History and the Monhegan Associates. Ed Deasy was director and president of the Monhegan Museum of Art and History for 36 years, and upon his retirement, an annual lecture was created to honor his many contributions to the museum and to the community. Ed passed away last winter and will be memorialized on Island this summer at a celebration of his life on August 12th. I'd like to thank both the Monhegan Associates and the Monhegan Museum of Art and History for collaborating on this year's series of lectures and workshops. We'd like to thank also the Monhegan House for its generous support of this event series. The next event in the series will be a presentation by biological oceanographer Jess Kusher, entitled Refuge on the Edge of the Sea, Monhegan Island Tide Pools, which takes place on Thursday, July 23rd at 7:30 p.m. at the Monhegan Schoolhouse. I want to express a big thank you to all of you for being here this evening. It's your support that makes these lectures possible. We encourage you to support stewardship of Monhegan's wildlands by becoming a member of the Monhegan Associates, and to support stewardship of the island's cultural and artistic history by becoming a member of the Monhegan Museum. You can go to the Monhegan Associates website and click on the donate button and do the same thing on the museum website, or you can become a museum member at the museum store when you visit the museum. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to let you know now that they will be taking questions after the talk, so save your questions until afterward. Tonight's lecture is being recorded, and if all goes well, will be posted on the Monhegan Associates website and the Monhegan Museum website sometime in the next week, probably. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you tonight's speakers, Chris Newell and Indonna Spears. Chris Newell grew up here in the Dawnland as a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Indian Township. He is a multi-award-winning museum professional and the Native American Cultural Director and Instructor in Residence at the University of Connecticut, and serves on the boards of trustees for the New England Museum Association, Tides Institute, and Maine Public. He's also a longtime member of the Mystic River Singers, an internationally acclaimed and award-winning intertribal powwow drum group based out of Connecticut. And if that isn't enough, he's been involved in numerous musical and documentary film projects and has authored 2 books in the Scholastic Books If You Lived series of children's books. Indonna Spears is a member of the Navajo Nation and is the practitioner in residence for tribal engagement at Brown University. She has extensive experience in the museum field, working for the Herd Museum, the Museum of Northern Arizona, the Mashantucket Pequod Museum and Research Center, the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma, and the Narragansett Indian Tribe, among others. She also serves as a member of the board of the Federation of State Humanities Councils. Chris and Indonna are co-founders of Akomawt Educational Initiative, a majority Native-owned educational support service and interpretive consultancy. With support from the Maine Humanities Council, they've been on island since Tuesday, providing invaluable training for the boards and staff of the Monhegan Museum of Art and History and the Monhegan Associates, and consulting with Monhegan Museum staff about our exhibits and collections. They will speak with us tonight about their work indigenizing museums and education. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chris Newell and Indonna Spears.
We're going to start off talking a little bit together, and then we're going to split off and talk about some of our individual work because we do work in other fields as well, or independently of each other. But this is one of the few times that we have got to work together in a long time. So this has been a complete joy being here at Monhegan, and the hospitality has been tremendous. The food is great. The island is awesome. It's just all of that. So, um, yeah. So, indigenizing museums and education, history and education. That's a little bit of what we do. And so we're going to be doing some intros first and just talking about a little bit about Akomawt Educational Initiative, and then we'll go into some of the projects. So I'm Chris Newell from Monhegan, which is Indian Township, Maine, located in Washington County, right close to the Canadian border. And born and raised there, but I now live in Mashantucket, Connecticut, with my wife and children, and work at the University of Connecticut as the director of the Native American Cultural Program, the first director. You might know me from my previous work as director of the Abbey Museum back in 2020 and 2021. A really interesting time in this country to take your first executive directorship. So that is me, and I'm going to hand it over to my friend Indonis to introduce herself.
Thank you, Chris. Yat Indonis Business Hishkan Zonishle, Ojibwe people, Bashichin, Tansan, Dishiche, Do Chata, and Chickasaw people, Dishnellen. Hi everyone, I'm Indonis Spears. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Navajo Nation. I was born and raised in central Arizona. I currently live in southern Rhode Island. I've lived there for about 18 years with my husband and our 4 children. My husband is an enrolled citizen of the Narragansett Indian tribe, which is the only federally recognized tribe in Rhode Island. And our 4 children are also enrolled citizens of the Narragansett Indian tribe. And just to echo Chris's remarks about the incredible hospitality and kindness and curiosity and interest and just willingness to learn and think collectively has just been such a wonderful experience here. So thank you so much for having us and for sharing in this conversation this evening.
Right. So we're not going to make you read all this. It's on our website. Right? So, but this is our logo, Akomawt Educational Initiative. We just wanted to give you a little bit of background. We came together in 2018. And Akomawt is from the Passamaquoddy language. It translates to the snowshoe path, hence the picture that was up there before. The idea is that snowshoe path is the symbol that drives our mission. We're not a nonprofit. We're a general partnership, kind of a think tank, I guess you could say. But we work to create new educational paths for any place where education happens, whether it's schools, universities, museums, of course, but also in other areas, media, and coming to talks like this and things like that. So it's about creating new learning paths for people to engage with Native content in a culturally competent way. And as we found when we began to get together in 2018, there was a lack of resources of like us. To be able to do this work. And so we've never advertised our work. We've always done work by word of mouth, but we have done quite a bit through the region, especially in southern New England, but also up here in Maine. And we'll be talking about some of that work in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll share some of that with you in a moment. But I think one of the things that we wanted to also mention is that we are a duo this evening, but actually Akomawt Educational Initiative is a trio. And our third partner is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Humanities Council, Dr. Jason Mancini. And the 3 of us met, as Chris mentioned, while we were working at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, which is the world's largest tribally owned and operated museum. And we had a very unique experience there because many of the people that we worked with during our time there were Native people, Mashantucket people who came into museum work with an understanding that the stories we were telling were not just stories of survival. They were stories of survivance. That the stories we were telling centered on an idea that the collections were not made up of objects, but of living belongings. And so when you do work in a museum environment of that nature, it really shifts the way you understand and approach museum work in general. So we just felt like we could take some of those lessons and some of those experiences with us and share them with other organizations and institutions around New England.
So this is an idea of some of the work that we have done together, all three of us. This is one of our earlier projects that we did with the Normandy Leventhal Map Center. So I talked with, we talked with everybody during the trainings about some of that work in detail. But one of the things that came out of it was a document that we created about best practices when teaching about Native people. And that was published by the Leventhal Map Center, and people have been using it in museums and in classrooms ever since then. And so these are resources that we have over time. Just realize by working with people and doing professional developments, these are the questions we're constantly being asked. What Native American, American Indian, what do I use? This questions that they were probably scared to ask in other places. And we try to make an open, honest place where people can ask questions that they're really wondering about, but were probably scared to ask. And these are a reaction to that. It's instead of us constantly having to answer the same questions, let's make some resources that would go forward and help out people.
Yeah, I think we can go to the next.
Okay. So this is another example of that, a quick reference guide for Indigenous terminology. This typically goes with universities. It's a little more in depth and detail. Like I said, it's a common question: Native American, American Indian, Native, Indigenous. What do I say? And what we tell people is that this is the English language. All of those terms are generalized terms, and they're not proper. I am not a Native American. I'm not American Indian. I'm a Passamaquoddy. But we are speaking in the foreign language of English, and so therefore we have to use these terms. So we do go over them, but what we end up telling people in the end is that they're all equally wrong. So don't get too hung up on it, but this gives a good breakdown, and it does go into much more detail than what you see on the slide.
Yeah, and just part of as Chris was saying, we try to be as responsive as possible. As the places where we get to engage with scholars, with museum professionals, with people working in public history, public humanities, sometimes we see these themes emerge across all of those spaces in terms of general questions. And so we try to develop resources that are responsive to those questions.
This is from some of our earliest work back in 2019. We started actually partnership with Untold Stories, and we were the plenary session for American Institute for Conservation, right? AIC, yes. Which is the largest organization of conservationists in the country. And it was attended by hundreds of people. And we really got to dig in to a lot of the work that we did with the land trust people and the Monhegan Museum folks in our training, just really digging into how, the future of museums can look if you involve Indigenous people, which is not the history of museums. All right, the history of museums has actually been excluding Native people, extracting from our communities. And what would a future look like if we had collaborative conservation with Native people? Guess what? The story gets a lot more interesting and a lot more, in depth when that happens.
Yeah, and what would education look like if it was developed in collaboration with living tribal nations, the descendants of the ancestral people that are taught about through lithics and through archaeology? How would that shift our understanding of what our relationship could be like with both land and people if we developed resources, developed curriculum, developed educational processes with Native people?
So this is a project that Adonis and I got to work on together. Jason sadly wasn't part of this one, so this was Adonis and I's part of our work. It was a large coalition of folks that worked on this project. So if you go to the Portland Museum of Art, a few years back, they did a complete reinterpretation on the second floor. And what they wanted to do was to really accomplish something new for museums, really take the history of art and not divorce it from some of the harder histories that we have to learn. So, things like the sugar bowl collection that they have there, beautiful, right? They're beautiful sugar bowls made out of crystal. They look awesome as art pieces. But guess what? The sugar trade is associated with early colonization, slave trade, amongst other things. And Passages is about connecting those threads, and including indigenous people in that. And we got to help, just like go through all the exhibits like we did at Monhegan today, and really talk about how to incorporate the indigenous knowledge, indigenous history that they were trying to use, include indigenous art, which was sparse at the time, and really make the connections, so Homer Winslow, right, which is the base of their collection, that's he creates beautiful art, and he should be lauded, but there are beautiful artists here in the state of Maine that are Wabanaki as well, and so as a result of this work, the Portland Museum of Art has elevated Wabanaki people like Jeremy Frey. Jeremy Frey is a basket maker. His baskets go for $10,000 to $20,000 a piece now. They're really high fine art. And for the first time ever, a museum, just any museum in anywhere, had a retrospective on just one single artist's work that ended up traveling from Portland to Germany to California to a few different places here. So this project, although it was kind of an experiment in a way, really opened the doors for the PMA to really start to think, how do we really, change things up and really get Native people in here and center them in that way.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we appreciated about working on this particular exhibit was that it was a process of people who were coming from diverse spaces, talking, and through conversation, informing interpretation about particular pieces of art. So we had environmentalists, we had Atlanta Black Box in the room, we had Akomawt, we had different kinds of people with subject matter expertise coming in and having iterative conversations about different pieces of art that then I think really informed a really rich exhibit.
Yes. And this is an example of what the Homer Winslow Gallery looks like now. So off to the right, you can't see his painting, but it would be on the right side here. That's his most famous seascape. And in the middle, instead of kind of what they used to have, there was kind of a random Euro-American sculpture. Nothing really talked to each other in the room. Like there was nothing going on as far as conversation. So now Homer Winslow's art is in conversation with this canoe, right? The water, the canoe, and then also with these baskets that are placed on the other side of the room. And as people walk into the gallery, not only are they exposed to the wonderful art that came, after colonization, but they're also exposed to the wonderful art that came before colonization, or even as part of colonization when it comes to fancy basketry. So there's a lot to talk about here, especially for Mainers, people that grew up here and know these histories a little bit better than, the folks that visit. It really started to open up conversations. And there's a sound stick of music in there. You can listen to Wabanaki music and hear authentic music as well. So this is kind of a juxtaposition in a way, but it sets up a really interesting place for a conversation. And that's the one of the things I value the most about this is, my father, Wayne Newell, had a habit. He spoke Passamaquoddy first and didn't learn English till he was past 10 years old. And he had a habit of defining English words with Passamaquoddy worldview. And what he would say about the word knowledge It is the energy that occurs between us when we're in conversation with one another. So he valued above all else conversation. And conversation doesn't just be, it's not just talking back and forth, right? These pieces can be in conversation with one another as well and cause conversation. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on now to talking a little bit about our individual work. So this one, I don't know, have anybody heard of the film Dawnland? There's a few, one or two hands. Okay, so let me explain this film. Dawnland is a documentary, full-length documentary that was created about the Wabanaki Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the Wabanaki Truth and Reconciliation Commission was signed under Paula Page's time and finished after his time. And it was really about the foster care system and how Native kids from the time of the Indian Child Welfare Act back in 1978 all the way up to 2012 were 19 times more likely to end up in the foster care system than a non-Native child. That's a truth, you know, about the state of Maine and the foster care system is our children are being stolen from us, and largely because of you know, cultural differences, and not understanding that, you know, we have ways in our communities where the community raises the children. In fact, I, as a Passamaquoddy, if I'm in my home community, I can call any child wuss or duz. Wuss is like saying son, duz is like saying daughter. And they treat me as if I am a parent, right? But I take care of them as if I'm a parent. If they're hungry, I give them food, right? So that's one of the ways that, you know, child raising is seen differently. To the state of Maine, that was seen as neglect. And so they, because of the cultural difference, you know, high occurrence of Native children being taken out. And the documentary really is it's a hard documentary to watch because it's so true and it hits home. It's right here. It happened in this state. And I was the senior advisor for the film. And so some of the work I do goes beyond the classroom. Media is one of the places where I love to work in, and Dawnland is a great example of that. So you can go, the Upstander project is a project that Adonis is going to talk about a little bit later, but we're both involved with. They are the ones that created this film and really started things off, and it did win an Emmy. It won an Emmy for the research. Interestingly enough, there was a piece in the film at the very beginning, a piece of film that had been disappeared from the world. It was just gone, but the research team had found, and that's the fun part about doing this type of work is what you find. They were reading through the transcripts of the hearings that were happening before the Indian Child Welfare Act passed in 1978. So back in 1974, they're listening to Native people talk about their children being taken away. And while reading the transcripts, they read a question: "Are the lights too bright for you?" And to filmmakers, that was a clue that, wait, there was cameras in the room. So there's not just transcripts, there's video of this. And so the team went and searched and searched and searched, and even had me in there searching. And I don't know how to search for media, but I was doing the best I can. And they found at TV 38 2 cans full of that documentary footage from those actual hearings, and that is what opens the film, and that's what won the Emmy. It was for research. So very proud of this work, but it also is a hard story to tell. You know, but I don't get into this work, you know, to tell easy stories. You know, I want to tell the truth, because the truth is what's going to eventually lead us to become better human beings, and that's really what it's all about. You know, the work that we do together is about creating better human beings and thinking about the future generations that follow after us, and that includes your future generations as well, because regardless of the history of colonization, we're all here now, and we all have something to contribute to the sustainability. Another documentary I produced, and you see probably a familiar face to some of the older folks here, Yo-Yo Ma on there. Back in 2021, I was at the Abbey Museum, and I was sent an email from the Office of Yo-Yo Ma, and said, from the Office of Yo-Yo Ma, in the subject matter, and I was like, what is this spam? And turns out Yo-Yo was coming to Acadia National Park, and he was going to be doing some pop-up performances. And he asked a question: what could he do with music that would be meaningful to Wabanaki people? And so I suggested that he play his music as the sun rose, which is actually, derived from a ceremony. There's other parts to the ceremony, but any human being can sit and watch the sun and sing to it, right? It's just it's something any human being can do. And so a documentary ended up being made about that moment, which was a terrific moment that changed our lives. A short documentary which you can watch on Vimeo, and it's part of a subset of the Upstander Project, called a set of films called the Reciprocity Project. So you see that in the bottom corner there. The Reciprocity Project, if you go to reciprocityproject.org, you are going to find a set of films, all Indigenous made shorts, all documentaries, from not just Indigenous cultures in America, but around the world. And it's a really great project and very educational. And the great thing about Dawnland and Akomawt, the Upstander Project, when they do this work, is they don't just make the film. They make a teacher's guide to go along with it. So there's teacher resources that you can use. So if you're going to teach about Wabanaki people, this is actually a tool you can use to talk about our music and talk about our welcome, what Wabanaki means, people of the Dawnland. We are here to welcome the sun. So it's a great way to use the humanities and the arts to teach, which is something that I ran into at Dartmouth. I used to be an engineer's major, and I switched over to the humanities because I realized the power of it, that with a powerful piece of music or poetry or something along that lines, that someone in the audience can literally change their perspective like that. That's what the humanities can do, and that's really why I switched my focus to that. So this is a little bit of some of the pictures from the moment there. Really beautiful moments out in Acadia National Park, and these are some of the performers. So this was done not just with me and Yo-Yo Ma, or Yo-Yo Ma and I, sorry. It was done in collaboration with Wabanaki performers, and Yo-Yo didn't want them to appear as tokens, and that was a very big challenge that we had to putting this together. And so in creating it, I created a piece in the show where he actively learns a powwow song from me as I sing it to him, and then we perform it together with drum and cello, something that's never been caught on camera before. So, and it's interesting because Yo-Yo Ma, being who he is, right? I didn't think he would actually go for this. As high level of a cello player as he is, but he's like, no, I'm just another kid in the sandbox. I want to play with you, So you can watch it and you see him. He struggles. He's sitting there watching me, really trying to catch the cues of what to do and when to go. And it's a vulnerable place for him, but he pulls it off like a boss, and it's a really beautiful moment of two worlds coming together, right? The classical music world and traditional Wabanaki music, and having it being seen on par with each other. And that's extremely powerful, especially to our youth. Especially to our youth, to be able to see us center stage. I'm watching the time, by the way, so we're good. So it's continued, with this work. Yo-Yo Ma, I have a project with him at Tanglewood coming up, where we're looking to help Tanglewood understand its Indigenous history, which they don't at all. They're used to concerts and everything like that. And it's a powerful place that really could uplift Native knowledge, should it choose to. This is from another project called We Are Water. And so back in October, I was commissioned with Yo-Yo Ma to co-curate a new show this time for the stage. So we were taking the magic of what we did at Acadia back in 2021 and bringing it to the stage. And so it involved Jeremy Dutcher, Molly Obomsawin, as well as some of the originals that were part of the crew, Roger Paul, Lauren Stevens. There was an Icelandic poet, Andri Snare Magnusson, to talk about, the crisis of water and what's happening in Iceland with the glaciers disappearing, and a local fiddler named Ida May Specker, who, really talked about the local issues with the flooding and stuff like that was happening in Vermont. And this was another sunrise concert that happened on the Connecticut River. A very beautiful moment here. And Yo-Yo's arriving by canoe. And so we're teaching the public here how this stuff goes. There's a protocol to how Wabanaki people received each other from the water. And it was with music. And so we practiced that. I actually taught the native students that are singers at Dartmouth how to sing a Passamaquoddy welcome song. And as Yo-Yo arrived, we sang that song to him as if, Wabanaki people are receiving Wabanaki people. So we were in Wabanaki homelands. Why would we not do this, right? So he arrives by canoe, and then the mist on the Connecticut River, Connecticut, something long and straight, by the way, is it's not the state that we call, it's the river. That's where the word comes from. It was beautifully misted, and there were hundreds of canoes out in the water, not to mention 300 people that had shown up, before sunrise to be there with us. And it was a beautiful moment. And so creating these moments is about creating memories, right? And when you create those memories, that opens the door once again to conversation. And I've been having several conversations with my friend here, like for the past 3 days. I mean, we've been talking nonstop, and it's been beautiful. Like that's what I love about this work, is that we create these moments, and that they last with people. I can remember one gentleman, a little bit older than myself, just walking up, not knowing what he was expecting to see that day, and coming up literally in tears, so affected by what he saw that day, just us being human beings in that space, and reflecting on nature and using music as the power and to be able to do that. So that's a little bit of my work that I do, sometimes separate from, Indigenous, but this is all part and parcel to what we love, to Akomawt's basis of what we do. So now I'm going to hand it over to Indigenous.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, pardon me. I just want to sneak in here. I can get the candle so I can give you some light.
Oh, we get candlelight.
Ambiance.
Like Chris said, I mean, we have overlapping work, we have work that interacts with one another, but it's all cumulative. I think it's all towards a future that involves understanding Native ways of knowing, Native worldviews, and adding that to an already rich experience of what it means to be a human being living here in what we now call the United States today. When I think about indigenizing history or museums or education, I think about the reason why I started doing this work with Akomawt, the reason why I do the work at Brown University. All of this work in educational spaces, really I can trace back to 2 weeks of when I was 6 years old. Living in central Arizona. My grandmother, so my father's mother, it's very distracting competing with the candle. It's very hard to compete with this process. When I was 6 years old, my grandmother, my father's mother, was a White Earth Ojibwe from White Earth, Minnesota. So she was from Ponsford, Minnesota. And she lived her whole life, adult life in the Southwest. Her and my grandfather were teachers, high school teachers for the Bureau of Indian Education. And my grandmother had very bad rheumatoid arthritis. And the doctors told them that if they went to go live in an arid landscape, that might be helpful for her health. So they moved to the Navajo reservation, and that is how my father met my mother. And so my grandmother, someone who's from Minnesota, was living her end years with us and our family in central Arizona. And when I was about 6 years old, she was preparing to pass away, to walk on to the next world. And she always spoke English to me. She spoke English to everyone around us. I never heard her speaking any other language. And she would kind of go in and out of these bouts of dementia, where she would be lucid 1 minute and then in another place another. And when she was in these bouts of dementia, she would start speaking a language I had never heard before. And I knew what Navajo sounded like. I was raised with my Navajo family. I was raised in Arizona. I know that language. I know what it sounds like. I know what Spanish sounds like. I know what English sounds like. But this was another language I had never heard before. And I asked my parents, I was a kindergartner, what is this language, this strange language? And they told me that she was speaking Anishinaabe or the Ojibwe language.
Oh.
That's okay, we'll come back to this.
Yeah,
Yes, and we'll answer a lot of questions. And I didn't know it at the time because I was 6 years old. But my grandmother was put on a train when she was 9 years old out of Bemidji, Minnesota, and sent to the Haskell Institute, a boarding school in Lawrence, Kansas. And once she arrived there, she only spoke Ojibwe. She only knew Ojibwe ways of life. She only wore Ojibwe clothes. And all of that was taken from her in a very harmful, violent manner. And she went through the boarding school process and emerged on the other side, and later on married my grandfather, and then they moved to Arizona, and then she arrived at this place at the end of her life. And my parents explained to me that my grandmother was speaking her home language. She was preparing, her spirit was preparing to go home. That her home language was not English. Her home language was Anishinaabe, was the Ojibwe language. And I didn't fully comprehend or understand the enormity of that experience because she never talked with me about it. I was a little girl. But as I got older and I started to understand her experience more and more, I realized that her story was a pivotal American story, and it was not being told in educational spaces. Not because it's meant to evoke guilt or shame, but because it can help us be preventative in doing it again. And so my work in Indigenizing, my work with Chris, my work with Jason, my work at Brown, my work, and I'll talk a little bit more about some other facets of my work, were all started from these 2 weeks of when I was a kindergartner and my grandmother started speaking her home language to me for the first time. And I have a picture here of the small girls ward at Haskell Institute, and I reflect back often on this picture of my grandmother is not pictured in this picture, but this is the nature of the military style dorms that our grandparents, not just mine, the Wabanaki people over the generations, Native families from across the United States, have these lost generations that inform how we build community today and how we heal. And so those of you that attended the training, we had a hearty conversation about survivance. And survivance is the combination of survival and resistance. It's a term that, ironically enough, a White Earth Ojibwe scholar invented in the 90s, Gerald Visner. And it recognizes all of the intentional decisions that Native people make on a daily basis to hold on to culture, language, and ways of knowing. And so when I think about my grandmother, I think about survivance. And I don't know if any of you noticed on the opening slide, but I use a lowercase e in my first name. I don't capitalize the E in my name. And the reason why is because my grandmother named me. My White Earth Ojibwe grandmother gave me my name. The boarding school survivor gave me my name. And it's an Ojibwe word. It's a word in her language, and it means my daughter or my beloved daughter. And I choose to believe that she did that as an act of survivance. Because every time someone introduces me in front of a group, someone calls to me across a parking lot, someone says my name in any capacity, they're speaking my grandmother's language to me, and I get to hear it. And it always makes me emotional every time I talk about it because I get to kind of feel her presence with me and the decisions she made with me. And it informs all of the work that I get to do in Akomawt and all of the work I get to do in these places where we talk about history and we talk about what's possible in the future. And so I don't capitalize the E in Indigenous because I recognize that we're using English language characters to spell out an Ojibwe word. And I don't have to follow English language rules if I don't want to with my Ojibwe name. So I'm adding an act of survivance to an act of survivance that my grandmother gifted to me. So that is my why of why I do this work. And as Chris mentioned, we get to do a lot of different kinds of work, and one of which I'm just coming off of right now. So last week was our 2026 Upstander Academy. If you know any classroom teachers in Maine or in Massachusetts that are interested in learning about how to shift education to not just including Indigenous ways of knowing, but centering Indigenous ways of knowing in this place we now call the New England or the Dawnland. Because the knowledge of how to live here sustainably is held within the Native communities that have done so, who have proven that they can live here for 11, 20,000 years since the glacier receded in a sustainable manner. And it's time that our children and our communities, all of us, Native and non-Native, begin to learn how to do that together. And so I wanted to highlight the incredible work of the Upstander Academy, of which I'm a co-director with Dr. Mishi Lesser and Roger Paul. And we take educators on experiences with Native knowledge keepers, one of which is pictured here, Mashpee Wampanoag culture bearer, Gisa Tanamuk, who is also integral to the film Dawnland and served on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission himself. He was a commissioner. And so we really hold this work as sacred work. This year, we used land-based learning and memorialization to think about how we teach about the history of this place and how we can do better. So there's some kind of key questions for us that we've had over the past 2 weeks. I think a lot of this work is heavily motivated by my own experiences, by being raised by people whose parents survived the boarding school era, and what I can possibly pass down to my own children. And speaking of the hospitality of this island, I was able to bring my 4 children, who are all pictured in various stages of infancy here, with me to the island. And these are key motivators for me to kind of think about what it means to reclaim culture, to teach other people, non-Native people, about culture, about sovereignty, about traditional forms of governance, about traditional ecological knowledge. All of those I see as very much as investments in these 4 human beings and Chris's children and all of our communities and your grandchildren, your children, your great-grandchildren, and all of our collective great-great-grandchildren that we may never meet. And so this is something that is always at the forefront for me, thinking about my grandmother's experience and thinking about my own children and my own grandchildren's experiences in the future and how that can inform the work that I'm doing now. So I'm going to introduce one last term that is very important, and we talked about this in our training as well, so I'll maybe quiz some of those that attended, just kidding. A really powerful term in addition to survivance, that I would want you to take away from this talk tonight. If you don't remember all of the incredible work of Chris, which I'm sure you'll remember, and all of the incredible work of Akomawt, I hope that you'll remember these key words, one of which is rematriation. So I'm sure we're all familiar with repatriation as a term, but rematriation takes a step back and looks at how entire communities or how entire tribal nations can reclaim their ties to land. And when they do that, you reclaim ties to language, you reclaim ties to traditional forms of kinship, you reclaim traditional sciences, you reclaim, I'm in the museum space for a reason, you reclaim traditional forms of aesthetics or what is beautiful. And all of those things are tied up in terms of ceremony and relationships in the processes of rematriation. And so I see a lot of the work that Chris does, a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the work that Upstander does as forwarding the values, the key values of rematriation. And so I have more pictures of my family here, both my mother and my father, my mother who is Diné or Navajo, my father who's White Earth Ojibwe and Choctaw and Chickasaw. And then I have my Narragansett family, my husband's people in southern Rhode Island. So my father-in-law who owns the only Narragansett-owned farm in Rhode Island, Ashawag Farm. If you're in South County, Rhode Island, please stop by and learn a little bit more about that and about my children, about a patriarch in our family, Tall Oak Whedon, who is a Mashpee Wampanoag community historian and leader, and also a formative member of the American Indian movement, and was a co-organizer of the first day of mourning in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So he's there pictured at my son's first laugh ceremony down there in the far left-hand corner. And I tell an emotional story because the work that we do is not about sterile or clean kinds of approaches to the work. And I think that very few forms of human work are. All of your work is informed by some kind of family story, some kind of passion, some kind of act of survivance on the behalf of some ancestor that you had. And I just wanted to share a little bit of an insight into mine in this particular work. So we can talk a little bit more about Chris's incredible books and answer questions. And if you want to get in touch with me, it's my Ojibwe name. It's indonis@gmail.com. So please feel free.
All right. We saved the most eloquent, speaker for the last. So I hate now going back to where my inspiration for writing goes right back to when I was 19 years old. There was a poet named Rita Joe, a Mi'kmaq poet. And if the Mi'kmaq were to choose a poet laureate, she would have been it. If you don't know Rita Joe's work, I highly recommend look it up. It's very powerful poetry. She went to the residential schools too. She had a hard time, and she used poetry to heal herself from it. And in the end, she chose a path of forgiveness. Not everybody does, but that's what she chose. And it's a really remarkable story that she tells through her poetry. And I sat in a talking circle with her when I was 19 years old during the reconstitution of the Wabanaki Confederacy. And she was a beautiful speaker, make everybody laugh, just spoken in Mi'kmaq pretty much the entire time and mixed in a little English. But one of the things that she did was she told us young ones, I was back then, she told us young ones, pick up a pencil and start writing. If you don't, then someone else is going to write our stories for us. And you guys have to be the ones to do it. And that stuck with me. It stuck with me, but I never got to the point of writing. And then I started working at the Pequot Museum, And I created, people were conflating the Thanksgiving story of the Mayflower in 1620 with the Pequot Massacre in 1637, where a day of Thanksgiving was declared afterwards in celebration of the massacre. And people were conflating the two histories. So at the Pequot Museum, I wanted to make sure people understood the histories right. So I created a program called Demystifying Thanksgiving. And I started to teach it. And as Scholastic started to rethink these books were created initially in the 70s, very popular in museums. As Scholastic thought about redoing them, they wanted to redo them with diverse authors, not just a single or two authors, which is what they did originally. And so the first book was If You Lived During the Plymouth Thanksgiving. And it's really a deep dive into not just the Plymouth Landing and the feast in 1621, but what happened before, right? The slave ships that were showing up, the disease that happened, what happened afterwards, and how the Thanksgiving holiday actually got created, which was actually part of propaganda from the Civil War. So there's a lot of interesting nuggets in there. It's written for children, but I actually write with parents and teachers as an audience, because oftentimes they are not taught this either. And my latest work is out this year, February. It came out, If You Lived During the American Revolution. And like Plymouth Thanksgiving, it's very inclusive of multiple perspectives of different populations during the Revolution, not necessarily a flag waving type of a book, because some of the histories, especially about what happened to Native people, Passamaquoddy people, we helped in the Revolution, but some tribes didn't and suffered as a result, and all of those stories get told within here. And so I don't hide from telling young children hard histories, because children, they are so resilient. They say, that's not my fault. I don't feel any guilt whatsoever. But I realized that that was a thing that human beings did, and it was wrong. And I'm not going to do that going forward. So that's the point of the writing that I do. So sorry that we had to go off track for that, but now we're ready to take questions.